When we talk about the history of America, we often think of the landmarks, the presidents, the wars, and the victories celebrated in textbooks. But the story of this nation isn't just about the dates and the documents. It's about the countless voices and struggles that have shaped the fabric of our society. Stories that too often remain untold. Long before the United States became the country we know today, the land was alive with the voices of those who called it home. Indigenous peoples, whose civilizations thrived for centuries, who built networks of trade, agriculture, and culture that rivaled any in the world. Their stories, their wisdom, and their sacrifices are the foundation upon which this nation was built. Yet, so often, their narratives are lost in the margins of history. Then came the waves of colonization, the arrival of settlers seeking opportunity, wealth, and sometimes redemption. But the pursuit of a new life often came at the cost of the old one. Communities were displaced, cultures were disrupted, and the very land itself became a battlefield for survival. The history we rarely hear is not just about discovery, it's about displacement, about resilience in the face of a changing world. And then there were the enslaved Africans brought against their will, whose labor, ingenuity, and unbroken spirit laid the foundations of the economy, the cities, and the industries that fueled early America. Their pain is often reduced to statistics, numbers on a ledger, but each number represents a human life, a story of survival, resistance, and hope. It's impossible to truly understand this country without acknowledging that the wealth and growth of the early nation were built upon the backs of those denied freedom. But even in the face of oppression, the human spirit persevered. Communities forged new identities, passed down songs, stories, and traditions that kept their cultures alive. Secret schools, coded messages, spirituals, all became tools of survival and resistance. And through them, a culture of resilience emerged, one that would lay the groundwork for movements that would sweep this nation centuries later. America's story also includes the immigrant waves that came seeking opportunity, escaping famine, persecution, and hardship. They carried with them not just dreams, but also the tensions of integration, discrimination, and the struggle to preserve identity while building a new home. From the factories of the Northeast to the railroads of the West, they helped construct the infrastructure, the cities, and the economy that many of us take for granted today. Yet history often overlooks the subtle, everyday struggles. The labor strikes, the women fighting for suffrage, the communities rallying to secure education, health care, and equality. These are not the battles that make the headlines in a history textbook, but they are the battles that define the character of the nation. They reveal that America has always been more than a series of political victories. It's a constant experiment in democracy, in justice, in the attempt to live up to the ideals it proclaims. Even the Founding Fathers, revered as architects of liberty, were products of contradiction. They championed freedom while tolerating slavery. They enshrined equality while excluding women, indigenous peoples, and those without property. To truly understand history, we must accept these contradictions, not to diminish the achievements, but to learn from the complexities, to see the seeds of both progress and failure that still resonate today. And so, when we explore the parts of America that history books neglect, we begin to see a richer, more nuanced narrative. It's a story of resilience, of courage, and of persistence in the face of unimaginable odds. It's a story not just of leaders in battles, but of ordinary people whose acts of bravery and vision quietly altered the course of the nation. This history reminds us that America's promise, its promise of liberty, opportunity, and equality, has never been fully realized. It has always been a work in progress, a challenge to every generation to live up to the ideals of freedom and justice. And understanding the hidden history, the stories less told, gives us context for why the work of democracy, of inclusion, of equality is never finished. As we reflect on these hidden chapters, we see patterns of courage that echo through time. The enslaved who ran toward freedom rather than away, the immigrants who risked everything to build a new life, the women who fought tirelessly for the right to vote. Each step forward was met with resistance, each victory with backlash. And yet, America's story moves forward, shaped by the will of those who refuse to be silenced. So today, as we revisit this hidden history, it's not to dwell on failure, but to celebrate the unheralded contributions, to honor the sacrifices, and to understand that the America we see today was built not just by the famous, but by the persistent, the brave, and the unyielding. It is in these stories that we find both humility and hope. Humility because no one man, no single victory can define a nation. Hope because even in the darkest times, ordinary citizens have shown extraordinary courage to change the course of history. And so, this journey, the journey of the America most people don't know, begins not in the halls of power, but in the hearts, the homes, and the struggles of the people who lived it. From the forgotten battlefields to the quiet resistance of communities, every untold story adds depth to our understanding. Every overlooked hero expands our vision of what America truly is, a nation built by the many, not just the few. When we think about the American Revolution, we often picture the founding fathers on the steps of Independence Hall, quills in hand, declaring liberty for a fledgling nation. But the truth, the deeper truth, is far more complex, far richer, and far more human. For every Washington, there were countless others whose courage, sacrifice, and vision shaped the course of history, often without recognition, often without reward. The revolution was not only fought with muskets and cannons, but with ideas, perseverance, and moral courage. Women, for instance, played indispensable roles, often overlooked in the grand narrative. They organized boycotts, managed households under siege, relayed messages, and maintained the economy while men fought on distant fields. Abigail Adams, Mercy Otis Warren, and countless anonymous women challenged the limitations placed upon them, advocating for education, political participation, and the basic dignity that would one day inspire generations to push for equality. African Americans, too, were present on battlefields and behind the scenes, navigating impossible choices. Enslaved men and women sometimes saw the revolution as an opportunity to claim their own freedom. Many served in militias, fought in key skirmishes, and sought to leverage the chaos to escape bondage. Their courage is often missing from the story, but it was real, palpable, and transformative. Their lives remind us that liberty is never freely given. It is demanded, earned, and protected by those willing to risk everything. Meanwhile, indigenous nations faced a devastating dilemma. Some allied with colonists, others with the British, seeking to protect their homelands from encroachment. Yet, no matter their choices, they faced dispossession, betrayal, and violence. The story of the revolution is incomplete without acknowledging that the fight for freedom by European settlers came at a staggering cost to the first inhabitants of this land. Recognizing these voices is not to diminish the revolution's significance, but to understand the full complexity of liberty and the sacrifices made in its pursuit. After independence, America's story did not pause. It shifted. The Constitution promised ideals of equality, freedom, and justice. But in reality, those promises were fragile, contested, and selectively applied. Movements for reform emerged almost immediately, driven by ordinary citizens who refused to accept the contradictions of a nation claiming liberty while denying it to many. Abolitionists, suffragists, labor organizers, and educators fought tirelessly to expand the definition of freedom beyond property-owning white men. Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and many others dedicated their lives to challenging injustice. They faced imprisonment, violence, and ridicule, yet their persistence laid the moral foundation for future generations. These were not the leaders celebrated on currency or statues, but their courage shaped the very soul of the nation. Even within communities often overlooked in traditional history, there were sparks of resistance and resilience. Immigrant laborers in industrial cities formed unions, demanded fair wages, and endured hazardous conditions to secure a future for their children. Native American activists advocated for sovereignty and recognition. Women in every region organized to improve education, healthcare, and social welfare. Their collective efforts transformed local communities and, in many ways, the trajectory of the nation itself. What emerges from this history is a profound lesson: democracy is not given. It is built incrementally by ordinary people acting with extraordinary courage. The grand narratives of presidents, generals, and statesmen are incomplete without acknowledging the invisible hands that crafted the everyday structures of liberty. This chapter of history, the untold revolution within the revolution, teaches us something timeless. The fight for justice and equality has always been messy, contested, and imperfect, yet progress occurs when people refuse to accept the status quo. The moral arc of history bends not through speeches alone, but through the persistent actions of citizens who refuse to be silent. The echoes of these hidden voices resonate today. Civil rights movements, labor reforms, Gender equality campaigns and immigrant advocacy all carry the DNA of those who struggled in silence for recognition, fairness, and dignity. Their sacrifices were the quiet fire that fueled the nation's growth. A reminder that history is not only written by victors, but by the brave individuals who persist against odds. As we reflect on these hidden narratives, it becomes clear that understanding history requires more than memorizing dates or celebrating victories. It demands empathy, the ability to see through the eyes of those who struggled, suffered, and triumphed without renown. These stories reveal a truth that resonates across generations. Freedom is never guaranteed, equality is never permanent, and justice is never automatic. They are earned, protected, and passed down through relentless human effort. By recognizing these hidden voices, we also recognize ourselves. Each American inherits not just the victories, but the burdens, the struggles, and the responsibilities of those who came before. The lesson is simple yet profound. The nation grows stronger when every voice is heard, every contribution acknowledged, and every injustice challenged. And so, the hidden history of revolution and reform is not merely a story of the past, it is a blueprint for the future. It asks us to question, to act, and to participate. It reminds us that the promise of America is ongoing, and that each generation has the power and the responsibility to shape it. The story continues as the struggles and triumphs of ordinary citizens interweave with the grand narrative, creating a nation that is as dynamic as it is complicated. And for those who are willing to look deeper, to listen harder, the history of America becomes not just a record of what happened, but an inspiration for what can yet be achieved. When we speak of America, we often celebrate its cities, its skyscrapers, and its economic might, but we rarely pause to honor the hands and hearts that built them. The factories, railroads, ports, and farms that shaped the nation were constructed not by the famous, but by the countless immigrants and laborers whose toil is woven into the very foundation of this country. Their stories are the hidden backbone of the American dream. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, waves of immigrants arrived on these shores. Italians, Irish, Germans, Poles, Chinese, and countless others, fleeing famine, persecution, or the simple hope for a better life. They arrived with little more than determination and the clothes on their backs, yet they transformed America. They built bridges, tunnels, railroads, and factories, often enduring conditions so grueling that modern eyes can barely comprehend them. Child labor was common, wages were low, and workdays stretched endlessly under harsh supervision. Many lost limbs, many lost lives, and yet they persevered. Their labor literally built the economy, the infrastructure, and the very cities that define modern America. And while history often celebrates industrial titans, the stories of those who dug, hammered, and lifted day after day are too often ignored. These workers also ignited a revolution of labor rights. They organized strikes, demanded safer conditions, and fought for the basic dignity of work. Figures like Mother Jones, Samuel Gompers, and countless anonymous organizers led movements that secured wages, hours, and protections we often take for granted today. These were ordinary people, yet through persistence, courage, and sacrifice, they reshaped the American workplace. Meanwhile, migration within the country added layers to this story. African Americans, escaping the terror of Jim Crow in the South, embarked on the Great Migration to northern cities. They transformed neighborhoods, culture, and industry, bringing music, art, and resilience to cities like Chicago, Detroit, and New York. Yet even in freedom, they faced discrimination, redlining, and systemic barriers that sought to limit their potential. Their contributions were immense, but their struggles were relentless. The labor of immigrants and internal migrants was not only physical but cultural. They brought languages, traditions, and innovations that enriched the American experience. They invented, created, and inspired, shaping the arts, sciences, and commerce in ways that continue to influence our lives today. Their stories remind us that the American dream was not simply inherited. It was fought for, often at enormous personal cost. And yet, these narratives are also stories of resilience and adaptation. Communities formed mutual aid societies, religious congregations, and cultural institutions that preserved heritage while forging new identities. These were spaces where hope survived amidst hardship and where ordinary people demonstrated extraordinary courage and ingenuity. In understanding these hidden architects of America, we begin to see the nation not as a static monument, but as a living, breathing creation of countless hands, minds, and spirits. The skyscrapers rise because people dug foundations in mud and sweat. The railroads spanned continents because people endured cold, injury, and isolation to lay the tracks. The factories hum because men, women, and children labored tirelessly to transform raw materials into the products that fueled growth. History, when told only through the lens of presidents and wars, misses this essential truth. America is a tapestry of human endeavor, often invisible to the eye, yet essential to the nation's very identity. It is a testament to the idea that ordinary people, acting with courage, diligence, and persistence, can shape the destiny of a nation. And through all of this, the idea of the American dream evolved. It was never a guarantee of wealth or fame. It was the promise that effort, resilience, and vision could carve out a place in the world. For every immigrant who arrived with nothing, every laborer who risked life and limb, and every African American striving for equality, that dream was both fragile and powerful, a motivation to endure, to innovate, and to hope. Their stories continue to ripple through time. They remind us that the nation's strength comes not only from leadership, but from the millions who build, sustain, and challenge it. Their invisible hands shaped every street, every building, and every enterprise, yet the credit too often eludes them. Recognizing these contributions is not just an act of historical justice. It is a recognition of the very soul of America. And so, as we uncover these hidden histories, we see a recurring lesson: progress is collective, growth is communal, and the nation's promise is realized not only by the influential or the famous, but by those whose persistence, courage, and labor have been unrecognized, yet fundamental. The story of labor and migration is, in essence, a story of hope and endurance, of people who refused to accept limits imposed upon them, who carved out opportunity through determination, and who shaped a nation through sheer will. It is a reminder that history is not only made in moments of heroism visible to the world, but also in daily acts of perseverance, sacrifice, and resilience. As we continue this journey through the hidden history of America, it becomes clear that every city street, every cultural tradition, and every institution is touched by the labor of the invisible architects. Their lives, struggles, and triumphs echo across generations, shaping the promise of America in ways that textbooks seldom capture. If the history of America is to be understood fully, we cannot skip the crucible of civil rights, the era when the nation confronted its own contradictions and wrestled with the ideals it had long proclaimed but failed to deliver. The mid-20th century was a time of profound transformation marked not by gentle reform, but by relentless courage, sacrifice, and moral confrontation. For decades, African Americans had lived under the shadow of Jim Crow, laws designed to enforce segregation, inequality, and systemic oppression. They were denied access to quality education, fair employment, and even the most basic human dignity. And yet, even in the face of violence and intimidation, they resisted. Their courage did not always make headlines, but it reverberated through communities, inspiring a movement that would reshape the nation. It began in small acts: a child refusing to leave a segregated library, a worker challenging unfair labor practices, but church congregation organizing quietly in the evenings. These were the seeds of transformation, planted in the soil of endurance and watered with the relentless belief in justice. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Medgar Evers, and countless unnamed activists gave voice to a generation's frustration and hope. They understood that change would not come through compromise alone, but through steadfast action, moral clarity, and the courage to confront entrenched systems of power. Yet even these iconic figures were not solitary heroes. They were part of a vast network of ordinary people whose bravery collectively shifted the course of the nation. The civil rights movement was not only about marches and speeches. It was about education, legal battles, and persistent community organizing. Lawyers, teachers, students, and housewives became catalysts for change, each contributing to a national reckoning that forced the country to confront the gap between its ideals and its realities. The courage displayed was often met with brutal resistance. Activists were beaten, imprisoned, and in some cases murdered. Churches were bombed. Families were threatened. Yet the movement pressed forward, fueled by the belief that justice was not optional, that equality was not negotiable, and that the moral arc of history, while long, bends toward fairness when guided by human will. Simultaneously, women across America were forging their own battles for recognition, equality, and voice. The women's rights movement gained momentum alongside civil rights, challenging systemic discrimination in education, employment, and politics. Figures like Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem pushed against the cultural norms that had long silenced women, demanding that opportunity and dignity be universal. Not selective, this period was also marked by critical legislative victories. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, milestones that codified legal protections but could not alone erase centuries of entrenched inequities. True change required vigilance, cultural shifts, and a continued commitment to equality. Immigrants, too, were reshaping the social and political landscape, fighting for inclusion, recognition, and access to opportunity. From Latino communities demanding labor rights to Asian American groups confronting discrimination, the civil rights era expanded beyond a single community, creating a broader dialogue about justice, representation, and belonging. What emerges from this hidden history as a powerful lesson: progress is neither linear nor guaranteed. Every step forward is the result of sustained struggle and resilience. Freedom, equality, and justice are principles that must be continually defended, interpreted, and realized by each generation. Understanding this period also reshapes our conception of leadership. True leaders are not only those who command attention on podiums or stages, they are also those who empower others to act, who nurture movements, and who instill courage in communities facing oppression. The civil rights crucible demonstrates that leadership is most potent when it amplifies collective voice rather than personal ambition. Even today, the echoes of these struggles persist. Voting rights, economic inequality, systemic discrimination. These challenges remind us that the work of civil rights is ongoing. Recognizing the hidden heroes of the movement is essential, not merely for historical accuracy, but to understand that the nation's moral progress depends on ordinary people daring to confront injustice. The civil rights era, in its courage and complexity, also serves as a mirror. It asks us to confront our own values, biases, and actions. It reminds us that justice requires vigilance, participation, and moral courage, that history is not a static record but a living responsibility, urging us to act in the present. As we continue this journey through the lesser-known history of America, the narrative becomes clear. The nation is shaped as much by those who quietly resist oppression and advocate for justice as it is by those whose names dominate textbooks. Each act of courage, each commitment to change, each sacrifice under duress builds the architecture of freedom. This hidden history is more than past events. It is a guide for understanding America today and a blueprint for how it might live up to its highest ideals. In recognizing the struggle and triumph of the civil rights era, we honor those who fought and equip ourselves with the insight to continue their work. When we speak of America's ascent on the global stage, we often cite landmark inventions, industrial growth, and the vision of great leaders. Yet, the deeper story, the story that history often overlooks, lies in the relentless innovation, the laborious experimentation, and the courage to imagine the impossible. This is the story of the countless men and women whose curiosity, creativity, and resilience transformed a fledgling nation into an engine of progress. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, America underwent a transformation fueled by ingenuity. The factories of the Northeast, the railroads stretching across vast plains, and the ports bustling with commerce became symbols of a nation embracing possibility. Behind these marvels were workers and inventors whose names might never appear in headlines, but whose contributions were indispensable. They risked injury, failure, and often their lives to push boundaries, to make ideas tangible, and to build a society capable of sustaining growth and innovation. Think of the inventors who labored in relative obscurity, men and women refining machinery, experimenting with electricity, or pioneering new forms of communication. Their breakthroughs were not sudden miracles, but the product of countless hours, repeated failures, and unyielding persistence. In many ways, these forgotten innovators were the true architects of modern America, shaping infrastructure, transportation, and industry in ways that remain foundational today. Yet, innovation alone is not enough. It requires the people willing to labor, to test, and to endure. The immigrant populations arriving at Ellis Island and beyond were the lifeblood of industrial expansion. They toiled in factories, dug tunnels, built bridges, and raised cities brick by brick. Their work was grueling, often invisible, yet it laid the economic foundation that allowed America to compete globally. These were the hands that transformed potential into reality, yet their stories rarely grace the pages of history books. Alongside industrial and technological growth, the country grappled with social innovation, movements that demanded equality, fairness, and opportunity in every sphere of life. Women fought for the right to vote, workers organized to secure safe conditions, and marginalized communities pushed back against discrimination. These social revolutions were as transformative as any invention, reshaping the nation's moral and legal framework, even if progress was slow and hard-won. Education played a critical role in this story. The establishment of schools, colleges, and public institutions empowered ordinary citizens to participate in innovation and industry. Literacy, research, and experimentation created a feedback loop where ideas could flourish and knowledge became a tool for upward mobility. The hidden history of America is inseparable from the classrooms, laboratories, and workshops where curiosity met opportunity. Even the moments of economic hardship reveal the resilience of the people. The Great Depression, for example, tested the nation's limits, exposing structural weaknesses while simultaneously catalyzing new policies and programs to protect citizens. The workers who endured unemployment, farmers who survived drought, and communities that banded together in mutual aid did more than survive. They laid the groundwork for a social safety net that continues to shape policy today. Innovation and industry are also intertwined with culture. The arts, literature, and music of this era were expressions of the human spirit amid change. Jazz, folk music, and modern literature reflected both the challenges and the aspirations of ordinary Americans, weaving a cultural narrative that paralleled technological and economic progress. These creative expressions informed identity, cohesion, and inspiration across generations, shaping not only what America built, but how it saw itself. This hidden story underscores a critical truth. America's rise was never inevitable. It required courage, labor, imagination, and sacrifice, traits embodied by the many who remained largely anonymous. Recognizing these contributions challenges the notion that history is made solely by leaders or by singular genius. It is a collective endeavor built through community mentorship, trial, and relentless perseverance. And yet, even as America advanced, inequities persisted. Industrial growth did not automatically translate to equal opportunity. Workers faced exploitation, communities were marginalized, and the benefits of progress were unevenly distributed. Understanding the hidden history of innovation means acknowledging both triumphs and limitations, and learning from the successes and failures alike. As we examine this era, one lesson becomes clear: progress requires vision, but it also demands action. Ideas alone cannot transform a nation. Only the people who implement them, the laborers who build, the thinkers who persist, and the communities who endure can bring possibility to life. Innovation, in other words, is inseparable from the human story. And so, the hidden history of America's rise is not merely a record of technological or industrial achievement. It is a story of courage, creativity, and endurance. It is a tribute to the invisible architects, the persistent dreamers, and the tireless workers whose contributions created the conditions for modern prosperity. Their stories remind us that the promise of America, of opportunity, ingenuity, and progress, is realized not by chance, but through effort, collaboration, and resilience. As we move toward the final chapter of this journey, the lesson is unmistakable: America's story is ongoing, shaped as much by the people we often overlook as by the figure we celebrate. Understanding this hidden history empowers us to recognize potential, to honor contribution, and to commit ourselves to the work of building a future that fulfills the promise of the past. As we arrive at the final chapter of this journey, it becomes clear that the true history of America is not contained in monuments, textbooks, or speeches alone. It lives in the quiet courage of the ordinary, the innovation of the overlooked, and the moral persistence of those who dared to challenge injustice. The story most people don't know is the story that matters most, because it shapes the world we inherit and the society we build for the future. America has always been a land of contradictions, a nation that proclaimed liberty while tolerating oppression, that celebrated progress while ignoring inequality. Yet, through these contradictions, something remarkable emerges: the resilience and creativity of the human spirit. It is in the faces of the enslaved, the immigrants, the laborers, the suffragists, the civil rights activists, and the countless unsung heroes who built, resisted, and inspired that we find the heartbeat of the nation. Their contributions remind us that history is not linear. It is complex, layered, and often uncomfortable. It is full of setbacks, failures, and injustices, yet also full of hope, innovation, and courage. From the invisible architects of industry to the hidden voices of revolution and reform. From the civil rights crucible to the labor and migration that shaped cities and communities, America's history is a mosaic of human endeavor. Each story, whether celebrated or overlooked, carries lessons that resonate today. These lessons are profound. They teach us that progress requires courage. The courage to challenge unjust systems, to fight for inclusion, and to speak truth to power. They teach us that innovation is inseparable from labor, that ideas alone cannot transform the world without those willing to implement, to build, and to endure. They teach us that equality is never fully realized, but must be pursued relentlessly generation after generation. The hidden history of America also reminds us that the nation's promise is collective. Its greatness does not rest on the deeds of a few, but on the resilience, creativity, and determination of the many. The skyscrapers, railroads, schools, and innovations that define modern America are the products of countless hands, minds, and spirits working in concert. Recognizing this truth shifts our understanding from hero worship to appreciation for the collective effort that builds society. Moreover, this history offers a mirror for today. It calls on us to examine our values, to confront inequities that persist, and to participate actively in shaping the nation's future. It urges us to listen to voices that are too often ignored, to amplify stories that have been overlooked, and to ensure that the lessons of the past inform the decisions of the present. Democracy, freedom, and justice are not inherited. They are created, defended, and renewed continuously. America's hidden history also reminds us of hope. Despite oppression, displacement, and struggle, communities endured, adapted, and innovated. They created culture, art, and institutions that transformed society. They laid the foundation for modern social, economic, and political life. They prove that even in the darkest times, human ingenuity, courage, and persistence can light a path forward. As we reflect on these untold stories, we are invited to participate in this ongoing journey. Every generation inherits the responsibility to advance liberty, justice, and opportunity. The story of America is not complete. It is a living narrative written daily by those who engage, resist, innovate, and inspire. Each citizen has the capacity to contribute, to challenge, and to shape the moral arc of history, just as countless unsung Americans did before. The ultimate lesson is simple, yet profound. America's greatness is measured not by power or wealth alone, but by the resilience, courage, and vision of its people. The nation's legacy is a tapestry of hidden voices, ordinary men and women who refused to accept injustice, who labored to innovate, who fought to expand liberty, and who persevered in the pursuit of a better future. Understanding this hidden history allows us to see America as it truly is, a work in progress, defined by struggle, enriched by diversity, and driven by the enduring human spirit. It reminds us that freedom is fragile, progress is earned, and justice requires vigilance. It inspires us to honor those who came before and to act in ways that secure the promise of the nation for those who will follow. And so the story concludes not with an endpoint, but with an invitation to reflect, to participate, and to recognize that history is alive, not only in textbooks, but in our communities, our decisions, and our commitment to justice. The America most people don't know is also the America that can guide us toward a future of possibility, equality, and hope. For in every hidden story lies a lesson, in every untold struggle lies inspiration, and in every overlooked voice lies the power to shape a nation. This is the America that endures, not as a monument, but as a living testament to the courage, creativity, and perseverance of its people. And that is the history we must know, remember, and carry forward.